Welcome to Question Time. On tonight's panel, Brandon Lewis, Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, previously the Government Minister in charge of planning for a no-deal Brexit. Labour's Shadow Secretary for Northern Ireland and former Shadow Policing Minister Louise Haigh. Joining us down the line, Arlene Foster, First Minister of Northern Ireland, Joint Head of Government and leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. Also with us down the line, Michelle O'Neill, Deputy First Minister, Joint Head of Government and Vice President of Sinn Féin. And Anand Menon, Professor of European Politics and Director of the UK in a Changing EU initiative. Good evening, welcome to you, welcome to my guests here in the studio, and of course to Arlene and Michelle who are joining us down the line. Our audience tonight, joining us virtually, of course, as always at the moment, comes from Northern Ireland, and welcome to you as well. Very good of you to join us. And to you at home, do join in the conversation on social media at BBC Question Time in the usual way. Right, let's get our first question now, which is from Kyle Hay.
Good evening all. Are noticeable food product shortages in supermarkets since 1st of January teething problems of Brexit, or are there much deeper issues with the Irish Sea border customs protocol?
Arlene Foster, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, well, of course, the protocol is something that was brought in by Boris Johnson to try and get Brexit done. But by doing so, it has separated Northern Ireland away from the rest of the United Kingdom, something we warned about. And since the protocol came in, there have been difficulties with haulage, with things like tariffs on steel, which we have worked very hard to get sorted out, with pets travel, with parcels, with a whole range of items. Now, we did warn the Prime Minister about this. It's why we voted against the withdrawal agreement. It's why we said to him that this was going to cause great difficulties, and it arose because of a skewed understanding of the Belfast Agreement, because of course, whilst North-South trade is important, what is really important to Northern Ireland is the trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, both ways. So it's important that we deal with all of the issues in the protocol. Prime Minister has said very recently that he will use Article 16 if necessary, and that means that he will take unilateral action to protect the citizens and the consumers and the businesses of Northern Ireland. And we would urge him to work with us to make sure that there isn't damage to the people of Northern Ireland and indeed to the businesses of Northern Ireland as well.
Well, Arlene, you're very critical about the protocol, but you did describe it, Boris Johnson's renegotiated Northern Ireland protocol, as a serious and sensible way forward.
No, I don't think I did. What I said was that that was, I think, back in October when we were saying in 2019 that it was important that the Northern Ireland Assembly had a say in those matters. Of course, he decided not to give the Northern Ireland Assembly a say in those matters, and it was just around SPS and animal checks at that time. What we have now at the moment is a whole range of protocol actions which causes damage to Northern Ireland, and of course, which is not what we were talking about in October 2019.
So, Anand, teething problems or much deeper issues with the protocol?
I think it's a combination of things. It is partly teething problems. Part of the problems we're having at the borders now will be overcome because it's a question of traders learning to use the right forms, learning how to fill them in and things like that. But, and it's a big but, there are other factors that will come into play. At the moment, we have a series of grace periods for food imports into Northern Ireland, for chilled meat products into Northern Ireland. The first of those grace periods ends on the 1st of April. At that point, things get harder again. So there'll be more delay at borders. And of course, remember, at the moment, we are dealing with a period of much reduced trade and travel because of COVID. So the real test of this agreement is going to come when we come out of the other side of the pandemic. Trade and travel come back to what is, closer to their normal level, at which point I think it's only then we'll be able to judge. But we shouldn't expect that things will be the same as they were before the 31st of December, because what Brexit means is there are checks now between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and that is going to mean delays. And in some cases, it might mean shortages if those delays become too long.
And in terms of teething problems or something that we should expect longer term, you've got companies now like John Lewis, for example, who are just not shipping from GB to Northern Ireland. Is that something you think will be ironed out, or is this something that we're going to have to live with?
Well, I can't speak to specific cases, but it's going to depend on calculations of cost. There will be some traders for whom it's simply not worth it to trade with Northern Ireland again. One of the things to watch, I think, over the next 12 months is, for pharmaceuticals, we have a grace period of 1 year. So the whole of this year is covered by this grace period. After which...
And when you say grace period, you mean that the checks that will have to apply do not apply now?
Do not apply now. The standards checks that, and of course, you're dealing with sending pharmaceuticals into the EU single market. Now, it might be that some pharmaceutical firms decide actually the size of the market means it's not worth complying with EU regulations to send stuff there. Each company will make its own decisions, but there will be changes to the way we trade because, I mean, in a sense, that's what Brexit was all about.
Michelle O'Neill?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing I would always say in terms of Brexit is that there isn't anything good to come from it, and I would remind viewers that the majority of people and elected representatives in the North actually are opposed to Brexit. So I think what we can see now is the outworking of that Brexit, and certainly from my assessment, it's very clear that what we're witnessing is a trading adjustment shock. It's very clear that the British government didn't prepare or work with businesses in terms of them being ready in order to be able to trade. So I think that's a big fault line in terms of operational readiness and actually being able to trade. Obviously, the deal went right down to the wire, so there wasn't an awful lot of time for businesses to prepare. But when you look at the problems that we're experiencing, they're actually as a direct result of Brexit. And I think that it's nonsensical, I think, for some claims which I've heard, particularly from Brandon this week, where he has referred to the fact that this is a direct result of COVID, whenever we all know it's because of the fact that there's not a readiness on the British end in terms of being able to adjust to the new trading patterns. Now, there has been some solutions found to a number of issues this over the course of the last number of weeks, something that I very much welcome. For example, there's been tariffs on steel being imported into the North, and obviously there's a big manufacturing industry here that very much is dependent on that importation. So I'm glad to see some solutions to some of these issues, but clearly this is the outworking of Brexit, and we're going to see, unfortunately, a lot more of that. My job as a political leader will be to obviously uphold the protocol, ensure that it's implemented in its entirety, and to find solutions to the problems that will arise as a direct result of Brexit, because there isn't anything good to come from it.
Brandon, I'm sure you want to answer that in a minute. I just want to hear from the audience first. Liam?
I was just wondering, do the DUP regret voting down Theresa May's backstop option, which many say was an even better option for the North of Ireland? And I'm just wondering, do they regret that now?
Arlene, I'll come back to you on a moment. I'll just hear some more questions from the audience. Darren?
Yeah, just on pets, what are the actual rules for pets going between Northern Ireland and Scotland or England or Wales? Because it seems to have become quite difficult.
And I presume you've got your dog behind you in mind, who's now just wandered off the sofa there, Darren.
She just popped in.
It's clearly a very personal issue for you. Well, look, Brandon, you can deal with that in a moment, but let's just come to the main question first of all. Are the food product shortages in supermarkets since January 1st teething problems or deeper issues with the Irish Sea border customs protocol, as Carl described it?
Well, actually, I think, as Alan said, I think that there's a range of things going on. Actually, I think Michelle knows what she said is quite correct. So the point I've made, and I made this very clearly actually in the House of Commons yesterday to the Select Committee and in oral questions, is the beginning of January there's been a number of things happening at the same time. So there are businesses who have made commercial decisions before the deal was done, actually before the protocol agreement was made, which was a bit earlier in December, and before the deal was done. That's a legitimate thing for them to do. They made those decisions. One of the supermarkets, that's why you've seen different branded products. I think it seems that they made a commercial decision on that. So you've seen that coming together. There was an issue with COVID, there is no doubt, not just in Northern Ireland, but the Welsh ministers have referred to this in Wales. I know even people in London have had an issue with the fact that some food suppliers have been badly affected by the problem we saw at Dover with COVID just before Christmas. That has a lag and a knock-on effect that we've seen on food shelves in Northern Ireland in terms of supply lines, but elsewhere. But that was part of, as well, businesses in Great Britain particularly getting used to the new systems. Now, the reason the protocol is there actually is what it allows for is products that are moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, some which move into the Republic of Ireland, are due to have tariffs because they're going into the EU from the UK. The reason there are, digital processes...
So that is as a result of Brexit. That's nothing to do with COVID.
Yeah,
let's be clear. You're talking say it's COVID. That's nothing to do with COVID.
No, but I've never said that the problems are just because of COVID. My point has always been that it's not just because of the protocol. There are some issues for businesses who are dealing with the EU because of the wider EU deal and getting used to the new systems that are in place because we have left the EU. There are companies who are still getting used to... I think you mentioned John Lewis with parcels. There is no reason John Lewis can't send parcels to Northern Ireland. But the parcels guidance came out on the 31st December. And I fully accept that they're taking their time.
But in terms, Brandon, of the protocol and the different checks...
There's a range of things that have been happening at the same time. But the point I made in the first few days of January, when I was talking to the BBC in Northern Ireland was the judgment of the protocol and how it's working will be best made when we're a few weeks, if not a couple of months down the line, and actually through COVID, rather than in the first few days, where there's a range of different...
Well, you say a few weeks. I mean, we're 3 weeks into it, so we're not more than a few days. But just in terms of the protocol and the differences it's made, the Prime Minister said in December, there's no question of there being checks on goods going Northern Ireland to Great Britain or Great Britain to Northern Ireland. Because if you look at what the deal is, we're part of the same current customs territory. No question of there being checks. And yet, if you want to ship something like mince, for example, from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, you have to fill in an entry summary declaration, a simplified frontier declaration, a GVMS goods movement reference, an export health certificate. I could go on, there's several other certificates here. If they're not checks, what are they?
Well, I don't know. I'd have to see it'd be interesting to see the wider quote that from the Prime Minister's.
Well, it's pretty simple, Brian. There's no question of there being checks on goods going from Great Britain to Northern Ireland.
What I've always said,
so he was wrong there?
No.
Well, he's not right, is he?
No, but it's worth looking at the wider point the Prime Minister may well have been making. We'd have to have a look at the wider quote. So the point we've always made is that Northern Ireland businesses will have unfettered access to Great Britain as part of the UK. That is what the protocol does deliver. For products moving from Great Britain into Northern Ireland, particularly with SPS checks, which is what mince would come under.
Which is sanitary and phytosanitary food and meat and animal products.
I'll let you pronounce that bit, but also because we've recognised, and we have done for a long time, the single epidemiological unit of the island of Ireland, there will be checks. To be fair, there have been checks of one form or another for SPS since about the 19th century.
But nothing like there are now.
No, that's what we've built on. And I've always been clear about that. We have built on that for those kind of products moving into Northern Ireland. Now, this is partly to ensure that Northern Ireland businesses and Great Britain businesses moving products to Northern Ireland that are staying in Northern Ireland get to do that tariff-free. And obviously, we've got to make sure that they have that ability, unlike goods that may well be moving into the Republic of Ireland, where obviously tariffs would apply.
Do you want to just quickly answer the question about the dog?
It's a beautiful, from what I could see, a lovely...
Oh, don't try and curry favour, Brandon. Come on, answer the question.
I'm sorry, I'm a bit of a dog fan myself. But look, at the moment, yes, you do need to have... at the moment, there's the Northern Ireland chief vet is allowing flexibility, particularly for guide dogs and things like that. What we have been categorised is what's called a Part 2 partner to the EU. Now, what we want to get is Part 1. So Part 2 means that we do need vaccination certificates for pets and things. This is why I'm absolutely with the point the First Minister Arlene made. We need to get that improved. We need to agree this with the EU to get that up to Part 1 categorisation. There's no reason not to be, because we are a completely clear island in GB and the island of Ireland from rabies and all of the sort of things the EU created Part 2 and 3 for. So we need to get that fixed. It's one of the things we do need to get fixed.
Well,
absolutely.
Louise?
Well, let me say firstly, Brandon's using the excuse of COVID. COVID will have actually lessened the disruption that we could have seen at the ports as the protocol has kicked into place, because we're seeing less freight as we would in normal times. The hospitality sector isn't open.
There's been there has been a problem with freight moving out of the UK into Europe because of COVID, and that's affected haulage going both ways.
There has, but there's also a significant drop in the amount of freight and haulage crossing between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, and because the hospitality sector is closed at the moment in Northern Ireland as well. Clearly, that means that we're not seeing as much traffic at the ports. So that he's absolutely right in saying that the real impacts and the real disruption will be seen over the coming weeks. But let me say, we have to make these the changes to these trading arrangements work, because the protocol contains two really important principles. Firstly, it was negotiated in order to avoid the border on the island of Ireland. But secondly, it contains the principle that it should have as minimal impact on the everyday lives of communities in Northern Ireland. And that's just as important, as Arlene said, to the Belfast Agreement, as avoiding that border on the island of Ireland as well. And that's simply not happening at the moment. We are seeing the consequence of it through rising prices, through shortages on supermarket shelves, and through disruption. And the roots of this are the denialism, which has been the hallmark of this government's approach to Northern Ireland from the beginning of this Brexit debate. You've just quoted from the Prime Minister, who last year and the year before told Northern Ireland businesses that they could rip up any paperwork that they would be required to fill in, that there would be no checks and controls between Great Britain and Northern Ireland.
That was going from Northern Ireland to Great Britain.
That's right, but there's also been continued denial about any checks and controls at all, about unfettered access both ways. And that denialism, that quite frankly dishonesty, has denied businesses and communities the time they needed to prepare all of last year and the opportunity to make this work. I think if this government truly wants to be a government of the whole United Kingdom, they need to be honest about the challenges facing Northern Ireland and take forward some of the practical solutions that we have suggested in order to make this work and deliver long-term solutions to the problems that we're seeing.
Philip.
To the Secretary of State, really, if I may, you keep insisting, and even tonight I'm unclear if you're backtracking on the fact that you don't count it as a border down the Irish Sea. If it's not a border, then what in fact is it?
Well, no, I'm afraid I don't know. I've never seen it as a border down the Irish Sea. I think what the protocol...
What is it then, just to answer Philip's point? If it's not a border,
as I say,
and all sorts of checks have to be done before you cross it...
As I said before, there's been checks, SPS checks of one form or another since the 19th century. And what we've always said is we're not putting in new customs infrastructure. There isn't that kind of a border there. What there is, and what there is for businesses in Great Britain who are moving products into Northern Ireland, first of all, Northern Ireland businesses have unfettered access into the rest of the UK market. That is what we promise, and that's what the protocol delivers. For Great Britain-based businesses, yes, there are administrative things that they need to do if they're moving products into Northern Ireland, particularly because what we want to do is ensure that they're not subject to the tariffs that they would be subject to if they were moving into the Republic of Ireland. That's what those administrative pieces of work are about. It's ensuring that Northern Ireland businesses and Great Britain businesses trading with Northern Ireland aren't penalised with tariffs that they shouldn't be paying.
Anna, do you want to come in? A border down the Irish Sea?
Well, I mean, that infrastructure has to be built, doesn't it? Because under the terms of the protocol, if you're shipping things into Northern Ireland from Great Britain, there's going to need to be checks, particularly on those sanitary and phytosanitary products. You're going to have to build a veterinary post and things like that. The Northern Ireland Executive is going to have to find a way of putting those things into place. And at the very least, it's a slightly anomalous situation, isn't it, where you are having these kind of checks within a country. It's a slightly unusual situation at best. You can call it a border or not as you please, but those checks will be there and they will be real and they'll affect the nature of trade between GB and NI.
Michelle, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, I think there's obviously a clear distinction and difference in terms of the approach to Brexit. And as I said, I think the DUP are the outlier in terms of the Brexit piece, and they have hitched their wagon wrongly to the Tories from the very outset of the Brexit discussion. And then here we are today dealing with all the challenges that we have. But I would say this in terms of the executive approach, whilst we disagree in terms of, absolutely in terms of Brexit itself, we do want to minimise the checks. But it's very clear for all to see that there's now infrastructure at our ports in order to deal with the SBS checks. And that was an essential part of the agreement that has been reached. But much be said about the protocol. The protocol is a protection, because the reality is also that throughout all of the Brexit debate, what was very clear was that the focus of the British government was very much on an English agenda and not in the best interests of the people who live here. So we sought protection. The protection is being delivered in the terms of the protocol. That prevents an all-island, or supports the all-island economy. It prevents a hard border on the island of Ireland. But also, really crucially importantly, it protects the Good Friday Agreement. And I have to say that, time and time again, I'm no longer astonished in terms of the approach of the British government, who have tried to run roughshod over the Good Friday Agreement, and that is an international agreement which they have threatened to breach, and as a matter of fact, they legislated to breach. And I think it's only that they felt the pressure from the United States in terms of trade deals and potential trade deals into the future, that they've actually rolled back on that, and now we have the outworkings of this. So the only security I think that the people of the North have here is in terms of the protocol. And as I said, my job as a political leader is to try to minimise the disruption, but I certainly will be looking towards the EU to make sure that there is full implementation of the protocol and it's protected.
And Arlene, I just want to go to Arlene for a minute. Sorry.
Can I just come back on this point?
Can I just let Arlene? No, Brian. Just want to let Arlene in. So, Arlene, you heard what Michelle had to say about hitching your Brexit wagon to the wrong horse, to extend your metaphor there, Michelle. And also the question from the audience: so, do you regret now not going for the Theresa May deal, and instead you've ended up with the protocol that you don't like?
Well, the Theresa May deal, of course, and the backstop envisaged in that, in the words of the Attorney General, would have been with us forever. At least with the protocol, we have an opportunity in the Northern Ireland Assembly to debate that in 4 years' time. And the Theresa May deal, of course, left us in the EU customs union and the single market for goods. At the moment, we're in the United Kingdom customs area. So, I think that is important to say that. So the Theresa May deal, and I know people have talked about this, including George Osborne over this past period of time. But of course, the reality is Theresa May couldn't even convince her own party to go with her deal, never mind the Democratic Unionist Party. So it's important to say that, and it would have left us in the EU customs union as well. But let me just take up the point about the Belfast Agreement. The Belfast Agreement is there for the protection of both communities in Northern Ireland, not just one community. And it's certainly not just about north-south relationships, it's also about east-west relationships as well. And I think that unfortunately the United Kingdom government under Theresa May and then continued with Boris Johnson fell into the trap that was laid for them by the Republic of Ireland through the European Union. That the Belfast Agreement was about no borders on the island of Ireland, but we can have a border internally within the United Kingdom. I mean, that is offensive. It's certainly not what was envisaged by the Belfast Agreement, and that's the reason why we have to try and not only minimise this protocol, but to deal with it effectively, to get rid of it, because it is offensive to the United Kingdom Constitution, and we need to deal with it in the proper way.
Thomas.
I just wanted to say a quick comment. My wife and I would shop between Lidl's and Tesco's for food shopping, and what we found since the 31st of December is that Lidl's have been much better stocked than Tesco's. I think the first week Tesco's had nothing, and we had to depend on everything in Lidl. Lidl has been so much better stocked in terms of meat, fruit and veg. I don't know what they're doing differently, but it seems to have not affected them as much.
Well, I know Lidl say they were preparing assiduously for 2 years, and they will be thrilled, Thomas, with your endorsement, I am sure. Clearly, other supermarkets are available. Chris.
Hello. I'm just wondering to what extent these little hiccups at the port are actually happening. From my point of view, an end user's point of view, I have no problem when I go to the shops. They're fully stocked. If I go to buy fuel, it's fully stocked. I've purchased by email 3 items recently, including these headphones, as well as a new doormat and boot polish.
All essential items, Chris.
Boot polish. Pardon?
All essential items, Chris.
Yeah, well, they are. They're everyday items as far as the end user's concerned. Every single drop of fuel that comes into Northern Ireland, unless I'm incorrect, they come from refineries in Great Britain. I haven't seen any shortages at the petrol stations. I've seen broken down cars for lack of fuel. The industry hasn't stopped. It's all working as far as I can see. So yes, there are problems that need to get sorted out. How much of this is being hyped up in the same way that Remainers said, oh, this will happen, that will happen, there'll be massive queues. The only seas we've seen anywhere on these islands was on the approach to the ports at the south of England when they were trying to get across to Europe, and that was caused by a hiccup over COVID-19.
Emma.
Yes, hello, good evening. I would just like to make a comment on behalf of small businesses. I run a business park up in Mollusk. We have around 60 businesses. I speak with them day and daily. A number of them ship out to Great Britain and receive stock in from Great Britain. And all of those who do are experiencing either massive delays in receiving stock through, or the administrative burden is proving colossal for their staff in terms of forms they have to fill out whenever they're shipping goods out. So I just thought I'd like to give them a voice this evening and say that the problems are very much real for our businesses in Northern Ireland, for our small business community.
Okay, well, we hear what you have to say. Thank you very much for your point of view. I'm going to take another point, but Darren, you just stuck your hand up, so let's hear what you've got to say. I think we've dealt with the dog now, so if you've got anything else you want to add.
Yeah, the dog's been dealt with. I was going to ask the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, when's the last time he went round a supermarket in Northern Ireland, and what did he see when he saw the shelves?
Well, I'm not sure how interesting that is, really, Brendan. I mean, unless the Secretary of State of Northern Ireland went post-January, I'm not entirely sure that's particularly...
I was going to say, because of the restrictions, I've not been since Christmas, so... but look,
let's move on then. Very briefly.
Very briefly. Look, first of all, the point I was going to make after Michelle, so it was pretty much the point that Arlene made. Those clauses that we were talking about, we were able to remove, because the EU, when we got the agreement on the protocol, remove some of the requests they made, which would have breached, if you like, strand 3 of the Good Friday Agreement. I will make the case. I think Arlene's absolutely right. Those clauses were about protecting the Good Friday Agreement, because it is just as much about East-West as it is about North-South, and it's important we remember that. But I do take Emma's point. I would just say, and this links into the point that somebody, I think Thomas might have made, or who was comparing different supermarkets without me promoting any particular supermarket. It's really important that businesses, and I appreciate small businesses are very focused on running their businesses and doing their day-to-day work. One of the things they can do is engage with the trader support service. It's free, the government is paying for that, and the companies, and some of the supermarkets have been named tonight, who have worked with that, have found no problems at all and have been able to get their flow working really well. They respond to 99.7%, I think it is, percent of all calls and deal with the issues within 15 minutes. It's a really good service, and I would encourage all businesses, particularly the small businesses who may not have engaged with it yet, to do that, and the government picks up the cost of that.
Let's take another question now from Thomas Clark. Thomas.
Good evening, panel. Deaths are still rising in our hospitals. In one day, 1,800 recorded yesterday. Is this lockdown enough?
Louise.
Well, this week we've learned that the UK has the highest death rate in the 7-day death rate in the world. That's an absolute tragedy. That's tens of thousands of families that have lost their loved ones, and that's not the fault of the dedicated nurses, carers and healthcare workers who've been risking their lives throughout this pandemic to protect ours. I'm afraid it's a fault of the poor decision making and the mistakes at the heart of this government. 10 months ago, I came on this programme, Fiona, and I said that if the government didn't take action to increase statutory sick pay and make sure that people could afford to self-isolate, then they would live to regret it and we would live to regret it as well. 10 months later, their advisors are still telling them that self-isolation is not being adhered to because people can't afford it, and they're still not taking action. It's been over a year before testing measures are introduced at the border. The systems that are needed to underpin an effective public health response, like test and trace, are still not effective. And so I'm afraid to say that the measures that they've taken, the slowness in going into lockdown and the speed at which they've lifted some of these restrictions have caused avoidable deaths. And it was foreseeable, and throughout this pandemic it's been completely foreseen.
Ben.
Oh, well, look, I think every...
Do you accept anything what Louise says?
Well, I accept it's utter tragedy when you lose lives. I mean, I suspect pretty much everybody will by now know somebody who's suffered from COVID and maybe lost somebody. I know 2 people in the last few weeks, sadly, who have passed away through COVID.
What about the delay?
But I think a couple of things I would say is, first of all, the 7-day average is difficult to. I would make the case. It's difficult to do a comparative internationally at the moment because you're looking at that where there are demographic and geographic differences around the world, and we all now know there are different strains of this virus and how it spreads around the world. So that's quite difficult.
What you can't dispute, Brandon, surely, is that it may be impossible to say at the moment on this particular day the UK has outperformed. I'm trying to think of a better phrase to use, the rest of the world in terms of the number of deaths, i.e. we have done worse. But what we can say is that we are among the worst. There's no doubt about that, is there?
At this point.
And this is what Louise is saying in terms of delay, that has contributed
at this point, and I think, well, actually, I think when you look at where we were in terms of where the R number was, the reason we were able to open up was the R number was low, and what we've seen is this, particularly with the new strain, obviously, and that's moved so quickly, it's so virulent, it spreads so quickly, is why we've gone back into this lockdown. All the decisions that we have made all the way through this have been led by the scientific and the medical advice we have had. And even if
sometimes they've called for lockdowns earlier than you've done it.
We've made the decisions based on the medical and the scientific advice that the government has had from SAGE and the Chief Medical Officer, Chief Scientific Advisor, and even when you look at, if you take the point around international travel, back in March last year, what Louise just referenced, the WHO's view was that actually that wasn't necessarily the right approach at that point in time. So we have been taking medical advice on this.
5 weeks after SAGE initially advised you to take that circuit breaker last year.
Well, we've seen, if you look at what Labour did in Wales, the circuit breaker didn't work. So I'm not sure that's necessarily the right point to be making. But what we've done every time is we look at the R rating, we look at what is happening around the country. It's what the tier system was about, trying to take up an approach that looked at what was happening in different parts of the country. Because even within the UK, and one of the reasons we've worked across as 4 nations, with Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England, with the devolved authorities looking at what is right for them, which I think is absolutely right, because there are differences across the UK. There's differences even in England. But with this new strain, we've all moved together because it's so virulent and the impact it's had is to move so quickly.
James.
Just in regards to the north of Ireland, Arlene, do you regret vetoing the 2-week extension just before Christmas that could have potentially saved more lives? Thanks.
Well, I was going to come to you, Michelle, and I'll come to you first then, Arlene. Do you want to answer the general point on that one in particular?
Well, first of all, can I say this has been an incredibly difficult time for everybody across Northern Ireland, and I think we have been learning as we go in terms of how we deal with COVID-19. Of course, it has changed direction, it has changed course throughout all of this. As you know, in the Republic of Ireland, they had a 5-week very harsh lockdown before Christmas, and then they found themselves in a worse position than we are at the moment. So, you can look back with hindsight and said, you should have done this, you should have done that. But actually what we're dealing with is a virus that changes direction, which spreads more virulently. And what we took the decision on at that point in time was listening to the voices of the medicals, of course, of the medical advice, of course, but also listening to the voices of those people who had not been able to open up their coffee shops and hairdressers for 4 weeks. They were in dire straits. So we give them an opportunity to open, bearing in mind the fact that it made 0.05 of a difference to the hour at that point in time. So I believe that we did take the right decision at that point in time. Of course, we'll all, as government ministers, be looking back on how we took these decisions over a period of time, and there'll be plenty of time for reflection over the coming years. But at this moment in time, what we're focusing on is saving lives, on protecting our hospitals, on protecting the NHS, and making sure that we have enough capacity in our NHS to deal with these issues, because of course at the moment, Fiona, we're just at the very peak of our hospital capacity issues. It's why our health minister felt the need to ask for military assistance this week. He's asked for 110 medics to come across to give him that assistance. I think that's absolutely the right decision. I'm very pleased that we have that capability to ask for that assistance in Northern Ireland when we get to that pinch point. So I think we are working together in the executive. Of course, as a 5-party coalition, there will be bumps along the way. Every jurisdiction, every administration has had challenges, Fiona, during this crisis that we're all facing into. But in a 5-party coalition that had just very recently come back together again, I think we have worked well together, and we will continue to do what is right for all of the people of Northern Ireland.
Michelle, the question is this lockdown enough? And of course, today in Northern Ireland, you've just extended the lockdown to the 5th of March.
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to say, I think there will be a day of reckoning for the Tories in terms of their approach, particularly at the very outset of the pandemic, when they had a herd immunity policy. And I think that that will...
They've always denied that was their policy. I mean, Brandon, I expect you to say that, but I'll just say it for you. They have always denied that was their policy, Michelle.
Of course, and it's denied many things, but that's my assessment of the approach. I think that from the very onset, the World Health Organization was very clear in terms of rapidly responding. They were very clear in saying it had to be test. The whole test, trace and isolate strategy, it took longer to kick in. But in terms of our own approach in the executive, I mean, we are 5 different political parties, 5 very different political outlooks. I've no doubt that everybody around the executive table is there to do what's right for people. They're there to work in the public interest. And 5 parties around any table to make decisions on all the different things that we deal with in politics is going to be challenged at the best of times. But for a fledgling executive that was only reformed after 3 years of political hiatus, I think this was a huge challenge. So there'll be reflection on our own approach as well, of course, and I think there's plenty of time for to do that. But as Arlene has said, this week, this is going to be the toughest week for our health service in the north of Ireland. And we're all very focused on what it is that we can do to support the healthcare workers at this moment in time. So from whenever at the very onset again of the pandemic, when we were predicting what could be the worst case scenario and explaining that to the public, that never materialised in wave 1 nor in wave 2. And then of course the public, rightly so, would feel that perhaps that this is not going to happen again. Unfortunately, that is what actually happened now, and we're dealing with the worst the worst time that we've been through the whole way through the pandemic. So we're very focused today again on extending our measures. Unfortunately, we've extended them for another 4 weeks, and potentially that could actually go on even into Easter. So our focus has to be on how do we support the businesses that were discussed, that they're experiencing all the implications of lockdown, the disruption to business, to trade, how we can support individuals to do the things that Louise talked about. How can you ask people to isolate if you're not supporting them?
Well, let's hear from some of these individuals here. We've got them in the audience. There's lots of hands up. Yes, Julianne.
Yes, I am a frontline health worker. I'm a doctor. I work in the emergency department. And I'd just like to ask the panel about the vaccination schedule for healthcare workers. We have received the Pfizer vaccine, the first dose, but our second doses have been delayed for 10 weeks, which is against the manufacturer Pfizer's guidelines. And recent evidence, and you talk about following the evidence, is that it would be safer for us to have the vaccine as it was designed and have the second dose at 3 weeks. Can you ensure that we're actually going to get a second dose? Because as frontline health workers, we feel as if we need to be protected as well.
I'll come back to that, Julianne. I'm just going to get round a few more people first. Anna.
So just listening there about this new lockdown, about the politician who travelled to Westminster after there were, about the travel restrictions. How come the public be, expected to follow the rules if some MLAs just think it's okay to travel over to Westminster, sit on the local trains, don't even bother wearing a mask, right, or don't adhere to what us, the public, are supposed to be following?
Helen?
Given the extension of the lockdown, I wonder how much is actually being done to implement this lockdown. My perception as a member of the public is that the roads are as busy as ever they were. I see people out in the shops. I see people congregating together that are not, two people people are congregating together that are from more than one household. It's quite apparent. So in terms of the wariness and the terms of actually people adhering to this lockdown, especially as they're talking about it moving on to Easter, what is actually being done to ensure that people are actually following the rules? And if they're not following the rules, then it's kind of what is the point in keeping on extending things for longer?
And Carl, let's hear from you.
I think that we all underestimated how far-reaching that COVID was going to be for our everyday lives. I suppose thinking about it at the time, that the 3-month initial lockdown was going to sort things out, I think that was a big mistake. And when it comes to this time now that we're in, I think that people are suffering from lockdown fatigue. And when the administration or when the government is asking people to do things, they think that it's possibly one rule for certain people and the rule for other people.
Elizabeth?
Hello, good evening to you all. I'm concerned with the extension of the lockdown, the effect that this is going to have on our young people, our children, and taking into account health and safety, education and social advancement of children and their mental health at the present time, which is undoubtedly suffering. Is it in the best interests of our children to continue with school closures?
Anna, do you want to come back to the central question, which is Elizabeth's asking, is the lockdown too damaging? The central question was, is this lockdown enough?
I think at the moment the lockdown hasn't worked, but there are some encouraging signs, aren't there? Behind the horrible headlines about fatalities, there is the sniff of good news that the rate of infections might now be coming down.
Well, we've had another data survey today that suggests the infections might actually be possibly going up.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of contradictory numbers out there. I mean, what I would say is the REACT Imperial College study is scary on the surface, but it doesn't actually tell us very much about whether or not cases are going down from December, because they're measuring the difference between November and January. So, and there is other evidence that suggests that from December the cases are going down. So there is a tiny bit of light. And I think we should also say that to date the vaccine programme has been remarkably successful. And a combination, if lockdown really is having that impact, with vaccine being rolled out effectively, and I think you can see a way in which lockdown could work. But we're going to have to stick with it for a long time. But I do think after this, and now is not the time to do this, as Arlene said, we're going to have a public inquiry after this, not only to consider whether decisions were taken at the right time, but to draw general lessons in the event of another pandemic, to think about how we organise ourselves as a society. I mean, we run our health service hot every winter. And one of the lessons of this pandemic, I think, is we might need to think a bit more about resilience and a bit less about efficiency, so that we have capacity to spare should we end up in this situation.
And let's just get an answer to Julianne's question, who's working in the emergency department. Michelle or Arlene, it could be either. Arlene, I'll start with you just for this one. Michelle, I'll come to you shortly. Okay. Can you guarantee that Julianne is going to get her second dose, and when will she get it?
Yeah, so this is something that we discussed with Michael Gove, Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford very recently in relation to the fact that this evidence was coming out of Israel, that actually the dose should have been given within the time period that was initially thought about. And I understand that the Chief Medical Officer, Chief Scientific Advisor are speaking to the Israeli scientists to make sure that what we are being advised, and of course we are not scientists, we're not virologists, we're certainly not doctors, so we take our advice from our Chief Medical Officers and Scientific Advisors, and they are saying to us that the first dose does give you a certain amount of protection, and that protection alongside all of the other measures in terms of social distancing, washing our hands, doing all of the basic things, will allow more people to get that first dose, and then the second dose will be administered. In terms of Northern Ireland, our care homes, I think it's 80% of our care home residents have now received their second dose in terms of the Pfizer vaccine. We're very pleased about that because it will give them that protection that we need. And as you know, in terms of our vaccination programme in Northern Ireland, we are rolling out very well and are leading in terms of the number of people per head of population who have been vaccinated. And I think that has worked very well with both of the vaccines, making sure that we use the Pfizer vaccine in the appropriate way, and then our GPs rolling out the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine in that way as well.
Let's try and get another question in from Liam Dunn.
As a consequence of Brexit, a border poll is very likely in the near future. Should planning and discussions on this issue be taken more seriously now?
Michelle.
Absolutely. I think the conversation we started talking about tonight in terms of Brexit and the implications of Brexit, I think there's one thing for sure is Brexit has become a catalyst for many, many people entering into the conversation around the constitutional future. And obviously it'll be the people alone who will decide the constitutional future. But certainly I think one of the things that has made the issue even more topical is the fact that the EU have said in the event of a successful unity referendum that the North automatically would go back into the EU with the rest of Ireland. And I think that becomes a stark question for many, many people now to consider, do you wish to be part of that sort of narrow English inward-looking Brexit Britain, or do you wish to be part of something better, which is inclusive, which is outward-looking and is within the EU in terms of Ireland? So I think that there is a conversation now that needs to be had, and we need to not fall into the same traps or as actually happened in terms of the Brexit debate, where there was a lot of misinformation, there was a lot of false information. Of course, there was a lot of information that wasn't there for people to consider and make the right choice. So my position is certainly that now is the time to plan. Now is the time to have the conversation. No one's anything to fear from the conversation, and certainly I don't see any contradiction in being in the Assembly, being a joint leader with Arlene in the executive, whilst also initiating and being part of the conversation around constitutional change, which is what's inbuilt in the Good Friday Agreement. It's, as I said, it's a principle of consent. It'll be the people that will decide. So I think the conversation is now an unstoppable conversation. So let us all enter it with our own standpoint. You know, it will all come with their own view. Arlene will argue the merits of the union. I'll argue the merits of uniting Ireland. And I think that this is a conversation now that, as I said, is unstoppable. And I've described this as the decade of opportunity. And I see George Osborne's talking about the opportunity in the time ahead. And I think that even Arlene's colleagues, one of the MPs actually joined in the course with Peter Robinson, the former leader of the DUP, who talked about now is the time for entering into this conversation.
I mean, George Osborne, former Chancellor, also talked about in terms of, he said sadly didn't think anyone would care. Outside Northern Ireland. Brandon Lewis, as a consequence of Brexit, a border poll, i.e. a referendum on a united Ireland, is very likely in the near future. That's Liam's point.
I think I'd argue quite the opposite. I think if you look at particularly what the protocol offers, and taking Anne's point about getting everything working smoothly, protocol means that as part of the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland is going to have this unique competitive advantage in the world, in the sense that Northern Ireland has the ability to trade in and as part of the United Kingdom, as well as through the single market with the EU. That's going to mean if you're a business who deals with the UK and a business that deals with the EU, the place to invest and grow your business is in Northern Ireland, and it benefits from that from being part of the UK.
Are you not concerned that, as far as goods are concerned, given that Northern Ireland is in the single market for goods, in the EU single market for goods, that frictionless trade with the EU is a lot more straightforward from Northern Ireland. So it pushes them a little bit closer to Dublin, a little bit further from London.
No, because you've got unfettered access to Northern Ireland into Great Britain as well. So you've got that ability to trade both ways. And I think that gives Northern Ireland a competitive advantage and a huge opportunity. Once we've come out of COVID, I appreciate in terms of business investment. I think also we've seen over the last year over £3 billion worth of support that Northern Ireland has had as part of the United Kingdom. But all of us as the United Kingdom are important. I disagree entirely with Georgie Osborne. I think this matters for the whole of the United Kingdom. I think we are stronger as a United Kingdom because we are united. We are 4 nations working together. I think COVID has been a really good example of that. But equally, where I do agree with Michelle, and the point that I think Gavin, one of the DUP MPs, was making just today, I think, and this fits in with an article I wrote earlier this week. Nobody should be stopped or afraid of having a conversation. It's right that we debate and discuss these things, particularly in the centenary year, where Northern Ireland has got so much to offer around the world.
So you welcome a conversation about a united Ireland?
I fully respect everybody. Part of the point of having peace and what has been delivered through the Good Friday Agreement is we can have these debates in a proper way, and everybody is free
but not
to have
a referendum,
view.
presumably.
I might entirely disagree with Michelle, and as she said with Arlene, quite rightly, I will make the case of why Northern Ireland doesn't just benefit from it in the UK. United Kingdom benefits from Northern Ireland being part of it. The United Kingdom as we know it exists because Northern Ireland is in it, and that's what's so, as I say, we're in the centenary year, and I think it's a chance to promote what Northern Ireland has to offer around the world.
Now, Leslie, what would you like to say?
I'd just like to make the point regarding the discussion about a united Ireland or not, as the case may be. Can I ask Arlene and Michelle, if those discussions don't go well, are you going to argue the point out and then throw headies in the bottom again for another 3 years and get paid for it?
Leslie, I heard you say that if they don't reach agreement, will they throw their teddies out of the pram because people are sick to the back teeth of it? Just paraphrasing what you say. Arlene, I'll come to you in a minute. There's a few more hands I want to hear from them. James.
Yeah, Brandon, it was last week that you actually refused to outline the criteria that needs to be met for a border poll. Can you explain what evidence brought you to that conclusion?
Okay, I'm just going to keep going. I'll come back to you, Brandon. Philip.
I would like to, ask the Secretary of State why he is not advocating and actually giving us examples of what the British government will do to promote the union. From my perspective as a unionist, I would also be concerned that we are sleepwalking into this conversation. It's a conversation that I also never thought would needed to be had in my lifetime, and I'm pretty sure it now will be. I would also say to our First Minister that it's probably due, partly, if not largely, to an incoherence within unionism at leadership level, and what does she see she can do to perhaps improve that?
Louise, do you want to answer this question before I come back to Arlene?
Well, I think it's quite important to set the context for this question and what the last 5 years have done to the debate in Northern Ireland, because there's no point denying that it's not been a difficult and precarious time for Northern Ireland, and I would say for unionism. Huge debates about the future of Northern Ireland have been had in Westminster, and I think a lot of people in Northern Ireland would feel that they are treated as an afterthought in Westminster at times, and at worst, a political football.
And where does Labour stand in terms of a referendum on a united Ireland?
I mean, first and foremost, we hold as the co-signatories to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, we hold the principles that they contained as absolutely sacrosanct. And as Michelle said, that is the principle of consent, and it is for the people of Northern Ireland to determine their own constitutional future. But the Belfast Good Friday Agreement also held that whatever your equally legitimate aspirations, whether they be to a united Ireland or to remain in the Union, that it is in all our responsibilities to drive progress in the here and now. And I think what I heard Leslie saying was that she wanted to see good government and good progress in the here and now, and driving change for people in Northern Ireland. My hero, Mo Mowlam, always said it was the real lives of people that needed changing, and that prosperity process would secure and determine the peace process into the future. And so I think all of us, the British government, the Northern Ireland Executive, and our other co-guarantors to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the Republic of Ireland, have a duty to secure that peace into the future and the prosperity. I know the last 5 years have frayed the bonds of the Union and frayed the bonds of the Good Friday Agreement, and I would just appeal to everyone who has a stake in Northern Ireland's future to rededicate themselves to finally implementing that Belfast Good Friday Agreement.
Arlene.
So thank you. I think it is important that we see the union for what it is, and that, of course, is a rational, logical choice. Of course, for me, it's much more. It's about the fact that I am a British citizen, and no one can take that away from me. But I think in terms of framing the discussion, we are in our centenary year now. Of course, when Northern Ireland was created, there were many that believed it wouldn't last for very long, and here we are celebrating 100 years, and that is because of the strength of all of our people here in Northern Ireland to do, as Leslie says, not concentrate on the constitutional position, but actually, as Louise has said, to concentrate on the things that matter to people on an everyday basis. And if you look at what has happened throughout this past year with COVID, and Brandon touched on this, we have not only received £3 billion in terms of support, the furlough scheme, of course, which helped a lot of ordinary people in their working lives, the self-employment scheme. But of course, our National Health Service, which is very much at the heart of our union, is very key to us. The fact that we've been able to take part in the UK-wide vaccination programme, that has been hugely important, and it's put us ahead of other parts of the world. And even today, when we had to call in for military assistance, we were able to do that because we're a part of the United Kingdom. So there's very tangible, very rational, logical reasons why we must remain within the UK, as well as if you look at, and Brandon made this point earlier in the week in an article, it's actually what Northern Ireland brings to the UK as well, because if you look at Queen's University, our university in Belfast here, has just been awarded the best entrepreneurial university in the whole of the United Kingdom, beating Cambridge. So we have some wonderful people here in Northern Ireland, a very strong education system, a great National Health Service. So on a rational and logical basis, I think that people will continue to choose to be within the United Kingdom. It is, of course, under the Belfast Agreement for the consent of the people of Northern Ireland, and there's certainly nothing to show that the people of Northern Ireland want to leave the United Kingdom in any of the opinion polls.
Anand, as a consequence of Brexit, a border poll is likely in the future. That's what Liam is saying.
I think you have to accept the fact that the Brexit process has led to a significant rethink of the UK Union, not just in Northern Ireland. You see the same process happening in Scotland. And so that just seems to be the reality at the moment. But for me, the priority at the moment is, yes, obviously people should plan because we're living in a very uncertain time where public opinion seems to be very, very volatile. But the priority surely at the moment is to make the protocol work. We are where we are. We have a new settlement for Northern Ireland that involves these very complicated arrangements. And whilst it is obviously perfectly legitimate to think about the future, I would hate it if because of that we lost sight of the present and didn't take this opportunity to make that protocol work as effectively as it can.
And when you hear businesses, and not all businesses I hasten to add, when you hear businesses talking about the reams of paperwork, saying it needs a kind of full-time admin job just to deal with this new paperwork much more than they had before, do you feel, from your knowledge of the Brexit process, that actually that is something that we'll be able to put behind us and will just get sorted out? Or will it continue to be a thorn in the side of some companies?
It will vary on the firms. Some firms will get used to the paperwork, deal with it, absorb the additional costs and keep on trading. Other firms, you think about the small businesses we heard about before, might struggle more because of the administrative load that's placed upon them. We shouldn't kid ourselves that Brexit means that trade will continue as it did before. It won't. It will change, and it might change in some quite profound ways. That doesn't mean that the protocol can't be made to work for Northern Ireland. It means that government and businesses need to work together to ensure that it functions as well as it possibly can.
So a few more hands up. Liam, it was your question, actually.
Yeah, just a couple of points. Arlene stated that obviously she's British and no one can take that away from her, and I agree with that. I don't think anyone wants to take that away from her, and I think any unity referendum is not about taking anyone's Britishness away from them. And I think Anand touched on a good point there. You know, he's saying about the here and now. The key is to make the protocol work in the here and now, but I think also one of the key things is we have to plan for this day coming, this referendum, because we have to learn from the shambles that was the Brexit referendum, and we have to make sure that any unity referendum is not like the Brexit referendum, and people know and have a clear and concise knowledge of what it is they're voting for. And we need to make sure, and if the referendum isn't for another 10 years, we need to start planning now.
Michelle, briefly, you want to come back in, then I must come back.
Yeah, I just want to say, I absolutely agree with that point. This is the time to plan. So you're planning for change. Now is the time to enter into the conversation. I would just differ respectfully with Anna in this point. There's no contradiction in actually trying to make the protocol work, which I'm absolutely wedded to, but also to work the principles of the Good Friday Agreement. The peace process and the Good Friday Agreement was the alternative to conflict. I voted for the Good Friday Agreement and for the peace process because of the principle of consent, because that gave me an opportunity to work every day to convince people of the merits of why a United Ireland, I believe, is in their better interest. So I think that, as I said, there's no contradiction actually in its delivering on day-to-day politics, the bread and butter issues, health, education, working together as 5 parties in the executive, but also alongside that, running parallel to have the conversation about what could a better future look like. Because our economy in the north performs poorly in comparison to, for example, if you look at what's happening in the south of Ireland, wages are lower in the north whenever you compare our economy and our GDP compared to what's happening in the rest of England. So I think...
Arlene is shaking her head at some of this, I have to point out.
Then let's have the conversation. We're having it tonight and the sky isn't falling in. So why not? Can we just continue that conversation into the future?
See, Fiona, I think it is important. It is important to have the conversation, but Michelle will want to place it in a narrative of a united Ireland. I'm placing it in the fact of the strengths of the union, and the fact is that Northern Ireland is not just a European leader, in some sense is a world leader in terms of our financial technology sector, in our cybersecurity sectors in Belfast. We have so much going for us in terms of looking out to the future globally as a result of Brexit. One of the reasons why I supported Brexit was to look globally instead of just being restrained by the bureaucracy and inflexibility of the European Union. So what we need to do is to look globally, and I think Northern Ireland is very well placed to do that, especially with our young people and the talent that we have here in Northern Ireland with the support of the UK government.
And Brandon, specifically looking at Philip's question, what are you doing in order to promote Northern Ireland?
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, actually. And I think, look, just picking up on Anna's point, as I said earlier, I think there are a range of things all of us who believe in the union should be looking at. First of all, making the case for why Northern Ireland benefits from being part of the United Kingdom. And as Arlene outlined, and as I said earlier, there are a whole range of things over the last year, particularly we have seen. I would make the case that if you look at the protocol working as part of Brexit gives you Northern Ireland a unique opportunity.
We've only got about 30 seconds left, Brandon. Do you want to answer Philip's question? What are you doing to promote Northern Ireland?
Well, we'll be promoting Northern Ireland around the world because Northern Ireland is important to the United Kingdom as well, as Arlene said. The way that Northern Ireland delivers for cyber, for industry, it's hugely important. And just to correct Michelle, Northern Ireland, the support financially Northern Ireland has as part of the UK, per capita is about 20% higher than anywhere else in the United Kingdom. The city deals are the biggest financial city deals in the whole of the United Kingdom because we want to support and see growth and opportunity in Northern Ireland.
Okay. You've got your hands up in the audience. Forgive me because our time is up, so I can't come to you now, much as I'd like to have done. Just want to say thank you very much to our panel, to Anna, to Brandon and to Louise joining me in the studio. Arlene and Michelle, thank you for joining us virtually. It's such a shame we couldn't have you here for reasons we all understand, but thank you very much. And of course, to you at home, thank you for watching. To our audience in Northern Ireland and to you sitting in your sitting rooms at home, thank you very much for watching from Question Time. Bye-bye.